All right, now that it is 2023 and I'm 19 years old, we are going to do another political compass test where we are going to dig up, dredge up my political beliefs. And keep in mind that I've not been following politics that much as of lately, thus meaning that I'm going to have a pretty nuanced opinion from more of a normie perspective. This will be one of the best videos you've ever seen in regards to the political compass because I'm one of the least autistic people that have actually done this test, okay? So let's keep in mind that I am a Zoomer. We're taking in the youth what do you call that point of view. I've been taking these tests since like the middle school era, so probably like 5 years ago. So we're going to go ahead and start off with this question. Number one being, if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interest of a transnational corporation. Now there is four options here. Obviously, light disagree to strong disagree and agree to agree. Strong agree, sorry. So that's the whole point, right? Personally, I'm not the type that would be believing in conspiracies, even though some of them are true. As in, I don't like to blame people for stuff that is inevitably in my control, meaning that I don't really even care if there's like this transnational organization, because I think that that sort of temperamentality is really gay, right? To think that, oh, these big corporations are fucking me over, I think that's very beta, and I just don't like that sort of thinking. So overall, I could care less about the question, is my actual opinion. So I'm narrowing it down to disagree or agree. Obviously, it should serve humanity over the corporations, even though it's kind of a misnomer because it can do both at the same time. These are not mutually exclusive things, so it's just basically a question asking for your natural predisposition politically. Because a lot of Bernie people would be like, "Oh, it's got to serve humanity. The corporations are really gay." It's like, no, 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 no. It's not like people talk about meat watching, right? And it's like, well, you're pocket watching the corporations, okay? Like maybe you should be exploited actually. But anyway, we'll just say agree lightly, tepidly, because I am a reasonable guy. The second point right here is I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. I would say more or less yes, because I think that people are, supposed to back up the country that they're born in. Because if not for that, then we have no continuity in the entire country or in the entire continent for that sake. Obviously, if you don't support your country, even like in an undying sort of a loyalty sense, then you're more likely to commit bad things in the name of other countries, such as being treasonous and being a snitch. And we don't like that sort of like Takashi predisposition for people. And overall, even if your country's doing the wrong thing, you have to be a man and back it up and willing to die for it. Now that might seem stupid because well, America's globalist. It's like, well, shut the fuck up, okay? I don't want to hear that. That's so gay. Like, seriously, stop complaining. You need to stop complaining. So support my point or not, okay? Fuck off. Third question: no one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Well, good point, right? Psych. I think you ought to be proud for something if it reflects upon you, right? So if people assume that you have a certain virtue predicated on you being from some place or being of somebody's origin, then that must mean that you are of some value, or at least the perceived value. And as many people say, and I believe in this wholeheartedly, that the perception matters more than the reality in a lot of instances, right? So if people think that, like for instance, a white guy that goes to Thailand, that guy has more power than the Thai dude in Bangkok, because realistically, the American virtues, the American popularity, the American economy is imbued in the people that are from there that have citizenship, which is why we have something called passport maxing, right? Where you can go C maxing, or where you can have you drop the passport and then all these opportunistic brown girls come and try to get you, right? So the whole point is that you ought to be proud of your country because people are proud of the country for you. They desire you because of the country. Thus, you are imbued with the sort of inheritance of the country, which is why you should not look bad as an American, as a tourist, because you are inheriting that sort of reputation that precedes you for generations behind you, assuming that you're a Native American that has been here for generations. So yes, you should be proud, because even if you're not proud as an American, what you do as an American will reflect upon you regardless of the fact. So you should be proud of your parents when you can, because your parents are going to reflect upon you regardless of whether or not you like them back. So that is an important concept to make. Now, what I just said there, that point was pretty genius, which is why this video is going to be better than most people's videos, because this level of autism is very manageable. And by that, I mean it's not even a real autistic thing I have. I just want to talk like this all the time. So let's go ahead and say strongly disagree. All right, so we're now on to the fourth question, I believe, and that is going to be that our race has superior qualities compared to with other races, is the quote here. Personally, I would say I you know I'm between disagree and agree lightly, and I say that because it's very nuanced, this topic, right? So obviously, culture and genetics plays a part into different people's character and actions, and they correlate a lot. But to say that these are absolutes, and is ridiculous. But to also say that these are mutually exclusive with each other as factors for people's well-being is also disingenuous to say. So the end point that I'm trying to make here is that race is real, but at the same time, can I objectively say that there are superior qualities on the aggregate? And also, the way that the question is phrased is also very unfortunate because it really isn't getting to the point here. Our race, like what is our race, right? Like I'm Latino, so by that logic, is the Latin race superior to other races? Because if you know anything about Latinos, they're not a homogenous race. Given that they are mixed, that they are European and Amerindian and whatnot, then you most likely want to be more precise with what you're asking. If you were to ask a Bantu African or a Scandinavian white guy what their race is representative of, that would be much more clear and more homogeneous. But because you're asking somebody like a Latino, incidentally, then obviously that's going to be more of a convoluted question to ask. With that being said, though, I would probably say that I would disagree lightly, only because there's a lot of like cliffhangers and a lot of loose ties basically with this sort of questioning, and it only inevitably is bad optics when you really push the race stuff. It really just rubs people the wrong way, because not only are you only really pretending to you're basically appealing to the one race that you are a part of, and for everybody else you're just warding them off. So just politically it's not really feasible. So a public position of mine would be to be like not very race realist, even if I am personally, and I'm not. Okay, I've looked into the race stuff and I believe a lot of it in regards to like crime rates and IQ. Like I think most of that is real, but at the same time you have to, at that, like, the best that you can, you need to analyze person per person on an individual basis, because that's what you would want them to do for you, right? For instance, I'm Latino, but I'm smarter than the vast majority of Asian people and white people and Jewish people and whatever smart people you can think of. And that being said, though, I can understand that most of my relatives are dumb relative to white people, and that is just a fact. But then again, is my race that much better than anybody else's? I would say no. So that is the long-winded answer of that right there. Okay, so we're on to the fifth question, I believe. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I generally agree with this. Now, this is where the autism would kick in, where obviously, technically, just because somebody is antagonistic to somebody I don't like doesn't mean that I'm friends with them. And the classic example of this would be like, for instance, that the Soviet Union and the United States that had opposing ideologies were not friends insofar they were just allied against the Nazi Germans, right? That being said, though, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they were friends, right? We're talking about trade agreements. We're talking about lend lease. We're talking about foreign aid, and we're talking about propaganda posters, of Uncle Joe, Stalin, and whatnot, right? So even if they weren't really friends, and there was a Cold War subsequent to the Second World War, you could obviously see that there was a propagandistic advantage into describing their sort of relationship as a nation, in between each other, as being mutually beneficial as friends. Okay, so I think that this more or less solidifies my opinion that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, insofar as we have this commonality, which is an enemy, right? So yeah, no, definitely enemy of my enemy is my friend. Again, not to be confused with actually being like best friends and being completely for each other, but we're saying for the political expediency of things that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I completely stand by that. All right, military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I completely agree with this because I don't believe in international law, because that is completely relative. And if we're going to go for relative truth, then the fact is that the United States, the country that I preside in, is probably more based on the truth than are other countries such as Israel or Germany or France or any civilized country. Is probably worse than America in a myriad of regards. So, with that being said, I would agree strongly that military action should supersede the NATO, should supersede the UN, because there's a lot of bureaucracy that is very incessant on a bunch of placating and bullshit, and that's just a waste of time and money, frankly. And I'm anti red tape, so that just goes without saying. So this last one for the first page is going to be: there is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I would say I disagree. I used to say agree. Really, realistically, if you're dumb enough to fall for like entertainment that's supposed to come off as, political propaganda that is supposed to come off as entertainment, then you probably shouldn't have an opinion in the first place. So the sort of people that fall for that are really dumb. And so, with that being said, I just could not care less. And what is the most common example of political propaganda being used as entertainment, and that would be basically movies, perhaps, or like late night comedy shows. But I'm pretty sure that the people that are predisposed to watch those like late night skits or whatnot are already like millennials, people that are already predisposed to be Democrats anyway. So how much of it of an effect is that really doing? And I would say hardly none at all. So by that logic, it doesn't really matter. And then in regards to television and movies, Hollywood obviously very controlled by leftists and whatnot. Um, I don't think that they really pass off that much information that isn't already tainted with political bias. And you can see that, after Gamergate, that there was like this huge incessant, review backlash to the, liberalization of a lot of these institutions in the media, to where people that are even marginally right wing will subconsciously understand already, if not completely reticent to understand that they know that they're propagandizing people through children's movies and whatnot. So it doesn't really matter. It's because it's polarized as a society that we can talk about these things in a way that is not confusing. Whereas, 30 years ago, you could actually make a better argument that even though the Hollywood industry was more conservative and the Overton window was further to the right back then, that the music and the stuff back then was more subversive because people had their guards down. Now that everybody's protective over their kids and whatnot, at least the politically entrenched classes are, that must mean then that the subversive propaganda is not as effective because, again, they already got their effect. So that is a very nuanced answer, but that is what it is. The second page is going to start off with people are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Now, that is going to be important to write down here. So I would say that, that's very hard. It's a very hard one, actually, now that I think about it. We obviously see rich people from like any myriad of circumstance really getting along. We also see races getting along in a big way. So that is very hard to understand. I honestly would go with disagree or agree, right? So I'm very split down the middle. Why? Well, let's take different examples, right? So you can see how rich people meet together. The World Economic Forum, we see different types of rich people, all sorts of races. You can see Jewish people meet up with Arabs, even though like they have a ton of stuff against each other because they have commonalities in the oil industry and other investments. You can also see certain cases where a lot of the oligarchs from different countries that have differing ideologies get along with each other. Obviously, the Chinese have billions of dollars in interest all around the continents, and even still, with their communist ideology on paper, they still get along with said industries and their magnates therein. So, thus meaning that there's a contradiction in the whole race separating everybody narrative. That being said, though, the race does play an impact on very primal situations. So, like the more ghetto an area that you get into, the race matters even more. So, of the sophisticated people, which are the people with the money and the control of the society in the first place, you would say that the class matters more. But in respect to the majority of the people, the bulk and the populace, you would say that these peasants are more or less, the plebeians are more or less predisposed to being more racially focused because they have less of a material objective or a high impulse control like the rich people do. So, for instance, if you were to look at a ghetto, or if you were to look in even more specifically into like a prison gang, you would see that there's a lot of racism within there. Not necessarily because the people before prison were really racist, but because they have such little trust in each other as individuals that they would better resort to being in these said groups, in the racial groups, right? You see the Aryan Brotherhood, you see the black people, you see the Mexicans, and they segregate each other. You see this the most in like Southern California, where there's a lot of diversity, where they separate each other into gangs, opportunistically, of course, to defend each other. And so that being said, that would make me conclude in summation that rich people who are in control, for the most part, are divided more so by class and are together based off of that, whereas the poor people, the majority, are based off of nationality slash race. So I say that people in power are more important on the political scale than are the populace because, in a democracy, rich people still have an outsized amount of power. In autocracies or in kingdoms and whatnot, the rich people just straight up have all the power anyway. So I'll just lean towards agree. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I would personally say um, that okay, that's very difficult. I would say inflation is more important because unemployment can be manipulated by the government in such a way that it's pernicious to where you would understand. A lot of people don't understand if you don't take an econ class that you can decrease the unemployment level and have a lot more people working, digging trenches and whatnot and doing things that are otherwise just useless. But on paper, seeming like, oh wow, these people are being so productive, working 40 hours a week, making X amount of money. But all the while, devaluing the currency by debasing it and wasting people's time and falsely representing fiat currency on the backs of labor that isn't actually worthwhile, thus causing inflation to go up. You saw a lot of waste in regards to the New Deal, circa 1935, where you saw Franklin Roosevelt resort himself to using all these programs, and a lot of them were not helpful at all, and that was a waste of money. In a lot of instances, billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars were wasted in that respect. You also saw the Obama thing, the Solyndra, I think it was like a solar panel thing, wind turbine industry, billions of dollars wasted on green energy stuff that would on paper hire people during a recession, but overall just wasted money. So that's why I'm more cautious about spending money on the unemployment fund and the government seizing control over that arena. That being said, though, inflation is also more important, I would say, because inflation dictates the currency. The currency is extremely important when we're talking about a globalized economy where we resort on exports and imports. A huge part of the economy is predicated on this, thus meaning that if our currency were to fluctuate too much because of inflation, that would necessarily be a bad thing. And there's an argument that inflation helps sell things, but the thing is that we're not predicated on selling things as much as we are on importing things because we are a developed society, unlike China, which would be the inverse. So because of that, I would say that inflation is more important than unemployment, though a libertarian would say that neither would be better, but fuck it. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. I would say I would disagree, only because the government that we're in, obviously this test I would assume was made by a Western person, of somebody in Europe or in America, and if that's the case, then you would see that the EPA and other groups for the government overregulate. So if that's the case, then we ought to lower that. So the Overton window should be moving to the right in respect to that. So because of this, I'll put it on disagree, but theoretically there should be some controls, because I do agree that there are certain corporations that don't really care about the future and would necessarily want to pollute or not really care just for the sake of saving money. That being said, though, people must agree to this fundamental point that like if you're supposed to run a lumber industry, that you have the incentive to regrow the trees thereafter, because you're not going to want to run out of trees eventually. That the same doesn't really apply with a lot of areas, because obviously trees are like an evergreen thing where you can chop them down and then regrow them, whereas with other things we're talking about finite resources, so it really depends. So that's why we need some level of regulatory agency. But at the same time, if you look into society prior to 1970, prior to Nixon with the EPA, it was running just fine without it. So all things being considered, I'll just go with disagree. Okay. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. I believe that's from Karl Marx in the 1800s. I would say no. That is because people merit different things. People deserve more if they work harder. And I think there's more than enough to go around in the society to accommodate this fact. And also, what incentive do you give people to work harder if you know that you're only going to get a finite amount of resource? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, which is why I would say that you need to necessarily limit the amount of control that a government has over people's income, because when you do that, you de-incentivize people to actually be excellent. You just breed in mediocrity, and with that, you provide a general stagnation of the society, thus meaning that even if you do get an eventual stabilization of resources and you get everybody well fed and whatnot, if nobody has the motivation to actually transcend any barrier, then you're going to be stuck wherever that common thread is, right? So for instance, if you're going to have the living progression and living standard of today's society, and if you were to get the greater poor population up to the middle class in terms of standard of living, assuming that everybody else is desensitized from actually earning more money because of the way the tax structure is made up by the government, that would be communist in the state, then theoretically they would have no reason to actually build businesses, make new inventions and whatnot, thus meaning that the economy would stay the exact same, which for a lot of people would be an actual downgrade versus the theoretical upside of capitalism that, even though leaves some people destitute, would allow for better growth and creative destruction and whatnot. So I would say strongly disagree with that notion. The freer the market, the freer the people. I would say yes, because obviously you're leaving up more choices to people, which just obviously means that you get more free people. And there's a lot of distributist or sort of like Catholicism based arguments as to more freedom is actually slavery because you're becoming slave to your vices. But I think that's kind of retarded, because that is an insightful thing to say, but ultimately we're talking about just freedom, and that means that you have to let people do whatever they want, and if that screws them over in the end, that is freedom still. And now you can be against freedom, and that would make sense, but to say like, oh well, I need to control your rights so they can be more free is just fucking ridiculous, right? So I mean, come on. Anyway, it's a whole misnomer of a problem. Regardless of the fact, we'll go with it's a sad reflection on society that something that is basic as drinking water is now bottled. I strongly disagree with that. I think that we should be able to sell anything that is of any value, because I think that is going to be the most efficient way to get certain resources out. obviously depending on the circumstance. Like if you were to look at Flint, Michigan, that is a government resource dependent water supply because the government mismanaged it, and now but the private corporations are stepping in. So that is an example where the government, having complete control of something could actually backfire, whereas with the private corporations would at least supplant the demand for a while. Providing more economic flexibility for the people that are in more uh, vulnerable positions in regards to like water. Anyway, land should not be a commodity to be bought and sold. I strongly disagree. I think that land is very important to be owned by individual people, whereas if the government were to own it, again, you run into the same issues where there's a general stagnation in the economy because there's less of a reason to do anything. So that's the whole problem with communism, in my opinion. So that's an easy one. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate their money and contribute nothing to their society. I agree. The only disagreement I have is the general sentimentality behind it is that it's, generally a lot of, instead of meat watching, I'll say pocket watching. There's a whole lot of like wallet watching. There's a whole lot of resentment, envy, and I just think that it is gay and it's, very effeminate to think like, oh well, blah 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 blah. You're making all this money. It's like, well, they're not taking money from you, frankly, and you know, unless the government were to tax it and redistribute it, which it shouldn't, then you wouldn't get any access to so and so's father's money anyway that died. So I don't know why people are so jealous. It's just very distasteful, and yeah, no. Obviously, people should make money based off of what they do, as work, but they generally shouldn't be disavowed for having parents that worked hard as well. And people that manipulate money, ideally that shouldn't be legal because that is a lack of labor behind the money being gained. But at the same time, how are you supposed to regulate that in an economy that is very complex and very decentralized from like Christianity and other tenets that would limit said vices in the first place? So we'll just go with agree now. Anyway, protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. I would agree. Strongly agree would also be okay, but there are certain exceptions. Obviously, protectionism has upsides and downsides. For instance, like you could save 1,000 jobs but cost 3,000 by a myriad of different circumstances because the economy is more, you would say, complicated than what a lot of economic planners would think so. So, predicated on that basis, you must think that protectionism can only be used by like, in certain political context. Obviously, if you're trying to protect a very narrow, defined industry, that might be worthwhile. Or if you're trying to source your own like computer chips or whatnot, you're trying to foment an industry in that basis, then that might be worthwhile. Or if you're like early America where you're trying to foster your own cotton industry or whatnot, then it might be more profitable in the long term to kind of obstruct from importing and exporting stuff and becoming reliant politically on another country. And again, libertarians might argue that there's a comparative advantage in trading and whatnot, but that only applies if every other country agrees to pacifism and to basically not screw each other over, which is just completely ridiculous to say in a society as volatile as this country has. Anyway, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. I agree. Obviously, that it's trying to get to a deeper message of like, well, should companies should spread love and what? No, no. The society should provide the bedrock on a lot of these things, and the corporation should be a reflection of the people that are staffing it, not the other way around. Okay, the corporation shouldn't be the fucking hegemony. Shouldn't have complete hegemony over what we should do as people or have any emotional impact on anybody really. Realistically, we should have a profit motivated industry backed by people that are moral and therefore have a moral society, not the other way around, in my opinion. Anyway, the rich are too highly taxed. I strongly agree with this. If you know any rich people, I have relatives that are really well off, and I see how much they have to pay in taxes, how hard it is to actually run a business, how much a pain in the ass it is to actually employ other people, and I would say that they are too highly taxed, and that if anything, the poor people are getting off kind of easy because these poor people, in a lot of instances, are not even trying, and yet they still have needs, which is fucking beyond me, right? Especially the men, okay? Men, if you're not working, if you're not in school, you got to get your act together. You needs got to wake up. Anyway, the point being is that the rich are too highly taxed. The people that disagree with us are people that don't know better economically, if they're communists or whatnot, or they're just losers and they're fucking meat watching and they're pocket watching and they're just hating, and these hating ass people need to stop. Anyway, those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of healthcare. I basically agree with this because obviously, better, if you work harder for money, you should be able to pay for better healthcare. Plus, if you have it all equal for everybody, then again, de-incentivizes people to be excellent. And we want excellence out of people. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Yes, obviously that can easily get out of hand, but in theory, a corporation will probably have economic leverage over the people that are paying for it. In certain instances, which would necessitate. Sorry, I'm stuttering. would necessitate the government to then step in to fix certain issues like that in limited cases. The same issue, with protectionism is like where the government can overcompensate with a problem, but generally it doesn't. There are problems when the government doesn't step in a flawed society as we are living in right now. A genuine free market that requires restrictions on the ability on a wait, hold on. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. I disagree. Basically, if you look, and I saw a academic agent video in high school. This YouTuber, he explained how virtually any monopoly throughout history in the United States, at least, has been more or less propped up indirectly by prior U.S. policy on economics and whatnot. Thus, meaning that the monopolies, as being like their own like private entity, is also very disingenuous for people to to actually infer that they exist, because obviously you're assuming that the government didn't step in to help them in some form or way. So, with that being said, I think that obviously the government could make a problem and then have to fix it later, but in principle the government made the problem to begin with, so you might as well just disarm the government. And monopolies right now aren't that bad. Right now, as of right now, like off the top of my head, the monopolies are not bad. In terms of like how bad they are, egregious at like price gouging and whatnot, that's not really an issue right now. It's not the top problem we have at the moment. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. I agree with this. Obviously, I'm getting tired of doing this. I'm talking a lot, but yeah, no. So if you've watched the channel, you know how I stand on these issues. I think that that life begins at conception, and with that being said, that would mean that you cannot kill it no matter what circumstance. I think I've opened my mind to the whole like life of the mother thing. I guess maybe then, but generally you should not open your mind to exceptions, because whenever you argue with the leftists on this, they're always gonna bitch at you over the very narrow circumstances of something happening. Like for instance, if you were to talk about transgender issues, they would say something like, "Oh, what if you're born with two genitals or whatever?" And it's like, dude, like really, you're gonna argue for like the 1 million people that are afflicted with this mental thing, and then argue that the 200 people in the entire country that have like the hermaphrodite thing, that's gonna like provide an argument for you. I mean, that is just very disingenuous. So don't even play with that. Okay, don't even buy into the exception argument, and just ban it over all around. Obviously, politically, you should have the exceptions because that's just what politically would get you elected in the first place. But just on the personal level, I think you should just ban it. All authority should be questioned. I strongly agree with this, basically because um, people can grow off of each other, thus meaning that people have flaws and other people can recognize them when the inherent person, the subject, cannot understand it themselves in certain instances, thus meaning that you should question everything, especially if you're a smart person. If you're dumb, then I guess you might as well just believe everybody. But like for me in my circumstance, I'm smart enough to question most people. And the thing is that I have flaws myself, and so I would benefit from people questioning me too in a lot of instances. Thus, meaning that you should allow people to be more open minded in regards to being questioned. Obviously, that could lead to down to a slippery slope where if you're very contrarian and also like very mid IQ, you could question God and just be a jackass and really bite yourself in the butt by questioning things in a very pernicious way that would rub people the wrong way. But in my situation, I do it the right way. So that being said, you should strongly agree with me right here. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I basically I agree, because in a very primitive sense, you need to command respect through violence, and by that, I'm saying that you need to be able to reciprocate what people do onto you in a negative sense, so that you can be seen as a provider, as a protector to women and to people around you. You have to come off as the alpha. So just off of that primal sense, that I agree with that mantra. Then secondly, in the civilized context, it doesn't have to be I like for okay. For instance, in a lot of situations, right? If you kill somebody, then the eye for an eye would be killing you too. But if you lock somebody up for 50 years, that's more or less the same difference anyway. So I would just agree that that all falls under the mantra. So I'm okay with that. And obviously, there is exceptions. Obviously, in the Christian context, people would ask for forgiveness, and if you're genuine about that, and if you don't commit the offense again, then you probably should forgive them and not enact revenge. But if they are unrepentant, then the revenge comes more easily and more justifiable, in my opinion, in a secular sense. So predicated off of that, I agree with the mantra overall, but not too much. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters. I agree, basically. Maybe I'm a cheapskate. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. That's a good question. I would say that they should make it compulsory, because I feel like there's a good like 20 to 40% of kids that are like not complete felons, but also have parents that don't really give a shit either way. And if you were to remove the attendance thing, that they would probably just not show up to school, and maybe they won't get flunked out immediately, but they just have their grades tank, and that would be awful for them. So, and I guess there's like a far off chance that like the government gets so leftist that they'll make all conservatives like attend like public school and whatnot. But I just doubt that it'll actually happen. So I don't care. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us to have different sorts so that people keep to their own kind. That would only work if we had segregated societies and like our own countries based off of like race and group, but that's not going to happen. So I think people should have the same rights. Good parents should sometimes spank their children. I strongly agree. If you're against people beating their children, I mean hitting them, then I think it's just a gay thing to believe in, right? Like, oh, I don't hit my kids. Okay, shut the fuck up then. Who cares? Who? It's like I don't get in an argument with my girlfriend, but what if you do and you win? Who cares? Get over it. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. I strongly agree because obviously there are things that family members should know about each other, and there are things that you shouldn't because even if they deserve to know the truth theoretically, they probably shouldn't know the exact details of it. For instance, um, you could infer that if you have like a teenage son that has internet access, that they're gonna do something, and like assuming that you're okay with that, you wouldn't want to know exactly if you know what I'm referring to, and in the case of like, for instance, like I know that my parents conceived of me, so I know they slept with each other, but I don't want to know the details. And if they went their whole lives without telling me any details of their sex life, I would be glad because I don't want to know that. So the reverse applies, right? If you're banging college chicks, you wouldn't want to tell your mom about it in detail. I think it's completely okay to keep secrets away that are not pertinent to them, right? If there's not, oh, sorry, if it's not their business, then you shouldn't be telling them things that are unsavory. So just by that logic, I strongly agree with that. Again, it's not like you're keeping secrets that are important to them. I'm saying like stuff that they shouldn't know about because that's just kind of like inappropriate to say. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. I disagree. I really don't even care, but I think that the whole like thing of people being arrested for pot is not even real. But second of all, I think that people use the pot charge just to kind of leverage it against people that are already getting arrested for something else, just to keep them in jail for longer, or for them to plead to a higher penalty case. So it's a very nuanced criminal justice thing that we have going on with the marijuana statutes, which is why I don't really care about it. And I'm personally anti-pot in the first place. So just given that, I'll just go with disagree. Obviously, it's not that bad of a drug compared to the other ones, which is why I won't put strongly agree. Strongly disagree. The more that I talk, the more I have a predisposition to stutter. So that you guys have to bear with me. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. I strongly agree. I was watching a Sneeko video, if you know who that is, who was basically talking about how the schools are bad because they are indoctrinating kids to have a 9 to 5 job. But just like, well, dumbass, you're a YouTuber or a Rumble guy, I guess now. So I mean, you wouldn't understand this, but I believe that there are millions and millions of people that cannot feasibly be celebrities and therefore have to be normies who have to have jobs. And so unless you propose that we have like some sort of commune where we have like our own hours and shit, like we obviously have to work a 9 to 5 in a lot of instances, thus meaning that they have to be educated in such a way, for people that loud, Nazi Germany and whatnot, if you know the Prussian model, people have to be indoctrinated somewhat to a formalized schedule, rigorous, hard work schedule, so that you can have this Anglo-Saxon Protestant work ethic, so then you can then be a productive member of society. And there are certain creatives and people that don't have to do that necessarily and become music artists and whatnot, but that's not for the majority of people to be. Therefore, you have to have the majority fall into some sort of normality where we can have some sort of stasis, homeostasis for the country so that we can have an actual prosperous society. Okay, people with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. I disagree. Obviously, this is just a technicality thing. I don't think that people with disabilities should reproduce at all, depending on what disability we're talking about. But like if it's inheritable, like Down syndrome or something, then of course you shouldn't have kids. But also, who has kids with disabilities anyway? Like I've never seen a Down syndrome couple before or anything. So I think it's kind of like a false, like really who cares? Who really cares? I mean, it's like the equivalent of like banning people that are 7 feet tall from dating people that are under 6 feet tall. Like how many relationships are applicable? Like Shaq and fucking Yao Ming and like 10 other people. It doesn't matter. But if the government can ban certain people from getting married, um, then they could probably start banning people from getting married in a conservative setting, which is why I'm against it. But obviously, if you have Down syndrome, you should not reproduce. But if you have Down syndrome, you're probably not listening to me. The most important thing for people to learn is to The most important thing for kids to learn is to accept discipline. I strongly agree because well, I agree. It's not the most important thing, but it's up there, and it goes without saying. There are no savage or civilized peoples. There are only different cultures. I strongly disagree. There's components to societies that are way better. It's like saying that all parties are made equal. And it's like no, parties have DJs, parties have better food, they have better accommodations, better people at them, better ambience, better temperature, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different circumstances, right? So if you were to compare like the Aboriginals in Australia, their society objectively by virtually every metric is worse than like the Egyptian civilization, for instance. So that means that the cultures are different, but they're different in worse ways in a lot of cases. Of course, there are upsides to primitive societies. That being said, though, on the net, better societies are seen in Europe, are seen in like North Africa compared to like Aborigines and Samoans and whatnot. Anyway, so Polynesians, for example, those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not accept society's support. I agree, and once you start working, you'll completely understand that too. If you don't work it right now, or like basically, the older you get, the more you hate bums. Is my argument. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Um, I disagree. I think that you should tackle your problems head on, especially when you're young, because I feel like my problems now aren't as bad as what they will be later on. So by that logic, I should be able to tackle them all right now. Because if I can't, then that would make me a beta bitch who will not make it when I'm 30. First generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I agree. I mean, obviously there are exceptions to the rule, but I think that arguing from the standpoint of exceptions is just very stupid and very tiring. So I won't trick myself into doing that again. A lot of leftists do that. So no, I think that the vast majority of people that are coming in, as adults or whatever, are not going to ingratiate themselves. You can tell that by the accent. A lot of them don't look like the average American and whatnot. So just predicated off of that, they probably will never integrate the same. It's like the equivalent of like joining a friend group that has been there since like kindergarten and like high school. I mean, it's not going to be the same. You can get along just fine, but then again, you're not going to have all the lore and the context. The same thing here. If you're an immigrant from Mexico who's like 25, you're not going to have the context of people that have been, living in Chesapeake Bay for 200 years and whatnot. So we'll just be open and honest about that, right? What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. I agree because people buy things based off of their own needs and wants. So if the people's so people are fulfilled by things that they want because that's what they want, meaning that if they buy something, that must mean that it's conforming to their own nature of wanting things, thus meaning that it's comporting to their desires generally, which would mean that society is benefiting from the biggest corporations because the biggest corporations are what's selling the most of the objects that people want. Obviously, what people want isn't always the right thing, but if you're just going off of the basis of what people want, then the corporations are satisfying the need, therefore they're doing it. Whereas the small corporations that might be more wholesome are ultimately not fulfilling the materialist objections or objectives of people. Therefore, they cannot be seen as positive for humanity just based off of that basis. Obviously, not completely conforming to the notion of Christianity where there's morality that's objective and whatnot, but I'm just going off of the relative basis of what people want on the earth level. And I would say that, yes, obviously the biggest corporations are servicing the most amount of people, thus fulfilling the prompt. Kind of like Amazon, right? They do the most, they serve the most people. Obviously, they're liberal and whatnot, but then again, who cares? No broadcasting institution, however independent the content may be, should receive public funding. Basically, agree only because of NPR. It's very liberal. It's very liberal now. Our civil liberties are being curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Terrorism. I agree a little bit. I think that virtually everybody that talks about like the Snowden stuff are exaggerating and they're just naive. The government does not have the manpower to study and like basically search everybody. And even with like the personalized ad stuff on Facebook, I don't see what the problem is there. So I think that's completely just fucking bullshit. And in respect to civil liberties, obviously, on paper, a lot of these things are bad, but people that are middle class, you think there's fucking do you really think they're spying on you? I mean, come on, just fucking can we that's how you can tell a lot of people have protagonist syndrome. It's like, well, they're spying on me shopping at Walmart. No, they're not, dude. Who cares? A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all arguments that delay progress in the democratic system. Of course, yeah, no shit. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. I disagree. Obviously, there's a principled argument being against it, but yes, the people that are most worried about it are probably criminals themselves. I think that's easy to say. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes, of course. No argument there. It's biblical. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people to be commanded. Yes, if you believe in hierarchy at all, that is completely true. Abstract art doesn't represent anything and shouldn't be considered art at all. I agree. Obviously, people disagree, but it's all relative. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. In criminal justice, I'll go strongly agree. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Um, I agree, only because we don't live in an ideal society where we can fix everybody, and the people that are arrested tend to be people that were already arrested before. So odds are that rehab would have worked the first time if they're coming back to prison. So, if we're dealing with the same like groups of people, the same races of people, the same like general trends and patterns, then you can see that it's transcends rehabilitation itself and has to do more so with the fundamental character of said people that are deserving of more punishment than being nice to them. Especially when it comes to rehab being more expensive than the punishment theoretically. So I'll just go with agree slightly. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Yeah, no shit. There's a lot of people that are completely, masochistic Satanist. Like people like Richard Ramirez, people that are just complete scumbags that'll go to the grave being cocky, and it's just utterly disgusting. So I completely disavow rehabilitating some people. There's a biblical notion, at least with like Baptist preachers sometimes, where they'll say that people are reprobate, which is like where you commit so much sin knowing that it's wrong and that you basically just shun the gift of God. And there's an argument to say that you can be so evil to the point where you can just forsake the gift of salvation, which I more or less agree with. Even if in principle you can never lose it, it's like, I mean, you might as well. If you just it's like if you fumble the ball 10 times per football game, like you've already lost, and there's like maybe a 1 in 1,000 chance where you rehabilitate that loss. But generally, if you're a if you're a murderer, whatever, then you're probably not going to be very repentant in a lot of cases. So the business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I agree. You could argue that they're both like equally as important because they don't exist without each other in any like meaningful extent. But I just don't like the people that are pro artist is the thing. So I'll just go with agree slightly. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I agree. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. And I disagree. They are exploiting the resources, but the people are consenting to it, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't be so happy to get their money from the big corporation. So that's kind of their problem, right? Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. I agree. Um, because the establishment is flawed, but you have to understand that it takes a lot of work and effort to actually provide people with the nation in the first place. Thus, to completely forsake it just because you don't like certain elements of it is just a high sense of arrogance from the people that are actually believing of those dogmas. So that is what it is. Astrology accurately explains many things. I strongly disagree with that. It's completely stupid. You cannot be moral without being religious. I agree. Again, there's a lot of pedantic disagreement and misnomers about this, but generally, if I believe in a objective truth based off of Christianity, if you're not a Christian, then I don't think you can be objectively moral, which is what ultimately matters. So I'm right. Charity is better when the social security as a means of helping. Wait, charity is better than SS as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Um, I agree because I feel like the sort of like personalized nature of charity is more effective than just blankly giving checks to people, in my opinion. Some people are naturally unlucky. I agree. Disagree. I disagree. If you're talking about like people are unlucky because they're born, with like deformities or they're born to a poor family, I agree with that. But if you're talking about like as adults, which is I think what they're getting at with the question, then it's less unlucky, but more so you're just dumb. And yes, things don't have to fall your way necessarily, but odds are if you're making the right choice over and over again that you won't get screwed over. Like odds are if you're a good quarterback that the receiver won't like bounce the ball in the air and have it be intercepted, right? Odds are that most of the time when there's an interception, it's usually your fault. So just by that logic, that when things go bad in your life, it's probably your fault. It is more important that my child's school instills religious values. I agree with this strongly. Obviously, it won't happen at the public level, but ideally, yes. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. I strongly agree with this. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more lax on like fornication and whatnot. But that's also because like the more you're presented with with like girls and whatnot, you're more likely to fall into temptation. Which so So I'm just being more realistic about this. But yeah, no, on paper, yeah, you should not have sex before marriage. But again, that's a very tall order nowadays. A same-sex couple and a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. I strongly disagree with that. That's obviously ridiculous, and I probably should not talk about this in depth because I do not want to get taken down on YouTube. Pornography, get it? Depicting consenting adults should be illegal for the adult population. Um, I disagree with that because I think it's bad, and the free speech argument is kind of facetious, and I just don't like it. In regards to like, oh, it's free speech to do so and so. It's like, dude, you're so full of shit. Like, really? Oh, that's like what George Washington was thinking of, right? Is like corn. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. What goes on in the private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I disagree because obviously the state is funded by the people. The people, as a tribe, as a nation, are more or less interested in the furthering of their own people. Thus, like, just generally speaking, you should have an interest on what people are doing with their sex lives. Are they being fertile and whatnot? Again, it sounds weird, and there's no way to really enforce a lot of this. But in principle, you should be able to like arrest people for doing stuff in the bedroom theoretically. Theoretically, depends on how bad it is. No one can, like, for example, there's like BDSM or something like that. Like, what the fuck? Like, that should be illegal. It's disgusting. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Eh, I would say I agree. Not completely agree because I'm not gay, so I wouldn't know. But I feel like the vast majority of homosexuals could be straight had they been raised differently or had they not been touched in a way. So, given that, I would say that's why I put agree. But then again, there's like you can tell that there's certain gay guys where it's like, they were gay like from like 5 years old or 7, so pre-puberty, which is a hard sell to say that they just developed it somehow. So I mean, but again, there's no gauging either, proven by science. So with that being said, I would say that no one can feel naturally, but there are more people that are closer to natural than otherwise, right? 'Cause there's a lot of people that you know, that become gay when they're like 14 versus people that are like 5 years old and playing with dolls. And I think that's a big difference. But overall, 5 is older than 0, so I don't think you're born gay technically. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I strongly agree. I feel like sluttiness is it's a bad virtue to have. I just don't like it. So yeah, no. So let's predict. I typically have gotten in the red. I'm sorry, in the blue area, authoritarian right wing. You know who I am if you watch the channel. I'm pretty conservative, and I've gone like over here a little bit on the like middle left, or like the dead borderline to the left. Like 3 years ago when I was like very hardcore political. Now I don't really care as much. I expect to be like over here somewhere down here, like down right, but we'll see. Oh, okay, there you go. That's the new political compass right there. I'm 4.63, whatever, 4.1, whatever. That's fantastic. So what leader is that comparable to necessarily? It doesn't say. Well, there it is, guys. Thank you for watching. I was recording this at 3 in the morning, so that's probably why I'm low energy. Thank you all for watching if you've gotten this far, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.